What would you do if the one person who was supposed to protect you secretly destroyed your future? I trusted my father. I believed every rejection letter was my fault. I believed I wasn't good enough. I believed I was the problem. Until the day I found out he had been calling employers behind my back, warning them not to hire me. And just when I thought my life was over, a forgotten email about my grandfather's will changed everything. Because at the will reading, the truth didn't just come out, it destroyed someone. Stay with me until the end of this story, because what happened in that ballroom will give you chills. And if you believe that family should protect, not control, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel. Your support is love, and it keeps stories like this alive. Now let me tell you what really happened. My name is Alara. I'm 27 years old, and for most of my adult life, my parents introduced me to the world as their biggest mistake. Not in those exact words, of course. They were more subtle than that. They told people I was unstable, irresponsible, difficult. When I applied for my first real job after graduating top of my class in finance, the interview went perfectly. The manager smiled, shook my hand, said, "We need more young women like you." 2 days later, I got a polite rejection email. Then another, and another. By the 15th rejection, I stopped celebrating interviews. I started walking into them already apologizing in my head for whatever flaw I must have had. I didn't know then that my flaw had a name. It was my father. He was respected in our town, board member, donor, the kind of man who shook hands firmly and laughed loudly, the kind of man people trusted with question. And quietly, carefully, he had been telling people not to trust me. He told them I had stolen money from home, that I was reckless, that she couldn't handle responsibility. He said he was only warning them as a father. What he didn't say was that the money in question was a tuition payment he'd promised to cover and then decided I didn't deserve. I'd used my own savings to pay it when he pulled out at the last minute. I paid him back anyway, every cent. I kept the bank receipts like proof of innocence in a trial no one knew I was on. But in a small town, truth is quiet and reputation is loud. When I confronted him, he didn't deny it. He leaned back in his leather chair and said, "You needed to learn that you don't get to defy me and still succeed." I had turned down his offer to work under him, unpaid, indefinitely. He called it mentorship. I called it a cage. He called my independence disrespect. For 2 years, I cleaned office buildings at night. I organized storage rooms. I folded laundry at a hotel where former classmates held conferences. I smiled when people from church avoided eye contact. I learned the shape of humiliation. It's heavier than you'd think. My mother would call sometimes and say, "Just come home, stop fighting. Your father wants what's best for you." But love shouldn't feel like surrender. The only person who ever told me that out loud was my grandfather. He had been quiet his whole life, a man who built a small logistics company from nothing, sold it quietly, and retired without ever bragging. He saw things other people ignored. When I was 16, he once told me, "There are 2 kinds of power, Alara, the kind that controls and the kind that protects. Learn the difference." I didn't understand what he meant then. He passed away 5 years ago. At the time, I thought the only thing he left me was a watch I couldn't afford to repair. I was wrong. One night, after a shift that left my hands raw from chemicals, I found an old email buried in a forgotten inbox. It was from a law firm, sent 3 years earlier, regarding a matter tied to the estate of a Thomas Vale, my grandfather. My heart started racing so hard I had to sit on the floor. The email said they had tried to reach me multiple times but were informed by a family representative that I was not interested. Family representative. My father. The next morning I called the firm. The original attorney had retired, but the case file still existed. There had been something left specifically in my name, something that required my signature to activate. "Why wasn't I notified?" I asked. "We were told you declined involvement," the assistant said carefully. I almost laughed, of course. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in a glass office tower in a city 3 hours away from home, across from a man named Adrian Cole, CEO of a fast-growing logistics company. He didn't interview me the way employers usually do. He looked at me like someone solving a long-standing equation. He opened a safe and placed a thin folder in front of me. Inside was a contract dated 20 years ago, an early investment agreement. My grandfather had invested a significant portion of his company's sales proceeds into Adrian's startup when it was nothing but an idea scribbled on a napkin. But he hadn't invested in his own name. He had invested in mine. through a trust structured so tight no one, not even my parents, could touch it. I owned 6% of Adrian's company, 6% of a company now valued in the hundreds of millions. I stared at the document until the letters blurred. Your grandfather believed in two things, Adrian said quietly. This company and you. I couldn't breathe properly. My father had spent 2 years convincing the world I was incapable of responsibility, and on paper, I had been a silent partner in one of the region's fastest-growing firms since I was a child. There was a letter in the folder. Alara, if you're reading this, it means you've reached the point I feared you would. I have watched how your father handles power. I know what happens when someone like him feels threatened by someone like you. I can't change him, but I can make sure you have options. Never let someone convince you that survival requires obedience. Build your own leverage, use it wisely. I cried in that office in a way I hadn't cried in years. Not from pain, from being seen. Adrian told me something else that made my pulse spike. Your father called this morning, he said calmly. He warned me about you. Of course he did. He said you were unstable, untrustworthy, and, I asked, bracing myself. Adrian smiled faintly. It's difficult to intimidate someone by insulting a shareholder. I laughed. It came out half broken, half relieved. A month later, the company hosted its annual industry summit. My father had been trying to secure a contract with them for years. He was invited. So was I. When I walked into that ballroom, I didn't feel small for the first time in a long time. I wasn't there as someone begging for a job. I was there as someone whose name was quietly stitched into the company's foundation. During the keynote, Adrian paused and said, "Tonight, I'd like to recognize someone who has been part of our story from the very beginning, though most of you didn't know it." He called my name. My father's face drained of color as I walked to the stage. Adrian spoke clearly. About early investors, about foresight, about trust placed in the next generation. And one of those early stakes, he said, belongs to Alara Vale, who has officially joined our executive strategy team this month. The room applauded. My father did not. He stormed forward, red-faced, accusing me of deception, of manipulation. He tried to spin his old story, but something had shifted. When a man publicly admits he sabotaged his own daughter's career to teach her obedience, people stop nodding politely. They start listening differently. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't humiliate him. I simply said, I wanted to succeed on my own. You decided that meant I had to fail. Silence is powerful when truth is standing in it. That night, he left early. Contracts he'd been pursuing quietly disappeared in the following weeks, not because I demanded it, but people had seen enough. I didn't celebrate his decline. I didn't need to. I moved to the city. I took my position seriously. I worked harder than anyone expected, including myself. I bought a small apartment with big windows. I fixed my grandfather's watch. My mother calls sometimes. She asks if I'll visit. I tell her I forgive her. I mean it. But forgiveness doesn't require returning to a cage. My father has never apologized. I don't expect him to. Freedom doesn't always come with closure. Sometimes it comes with clarity. Here's what I learned, and if you're still listening, I hope you hear this part carefully. Control is not love. Protection is. The people who love you build safety nets, not traps. They give you tools, not ultimatums. They prepare exits, not prisons. And if you're in a place right now where someone is trying to convince you that your survival depends on shrinking yourself, please know this. It doesn't. You might not have a hidden investment waiting for you. You might not have a dramatic ballroom moment where everything flips. But somewhere there is a door. It might take years to find it. You might have to scrub floors while you look. You might cry more than you think you can survive. Keep going anyway. Because sometimes the quietest preparation, the smallest seed planted years ago, becomes the leverage that saves you. My grandfather couldn't change my father, but he gave me something stronger than protection. He gave me options. And options are freedom. If this story touched something in you, hold on to that feeling. You're not weak for wanting respect. You're not selfish for wanting independence. And setting a boundary with someone who raised you is not betrayal. It's self-respect. Thank you for staying with me to the end. Wherever you're listening from, whatever time it is there, I hope you remember this. You are not someone else's asset. You are your own foundation. And you deserve to build a life that no one else can sabotage.